bend a certain way. So, you know, and as you get going on this, you get to know how you need to cut the foam and what kind of a rounded thing to get it to curve in the right way that you want it to curve. I would recommend starting off with a basic pattern. And helmets are the greatest. Helmets or gauntlets are the greatest. Evil Ted, if you go to Evil Ted, he has some great basic patterns, and they're cheap. I mean, they're like $5. You can download it, and it prints out on 8x10 paper like this, and you just cut it out. You stick it on your foam, and you trace it on, and you cut it out.
Okay.
And you glue it together. It's just like a jigsaw puzzle. And as you build more and more of these using those, you'll start to see how they do certain kind of, you know, cuts to get it to bend and twist a certain way. Because foam is great. It will bend, twist, it stretch. I mean, it's amazing stuff. And you can get it to do lots and lots of things. I would start out with a basic pattern. I mean, he's got great helmet patterns. He's got great chest armor patterns. Basic one, and then you just add all the stuff onto it, make it your own fancy, whatever you want.
To expand actually on the question, and he's right on the mark. This isn't printed to size, but this is from Evil Ted, just these two pieces to make your basic bowl pattern. It's just like the sugar bowl. I made the mistake the first time I printed it out. This is just like the header page. I printed the full thing out and put it together. I ended up with the helmet. I didn't throw it away. Eventually, I actually used it. It became a helmet for another costume. I needed this monster helmet. But like the Viking helmet here, it's done with the basic bowl pattern, done the size. It's just these two shapes here. And you're like, well, how do you get the curve on that? Well, it's because of the foam, and the notches are where you're supposed to line it up. When you line them up and start at one end, as you glue, the foam is forced to arc inward. I wondered that myself the very first time I did this. Like, how am I going to make a circle out of this? That don't look nothing like a circle. Look, you think of it as like sections of an orange.
Okay.
Yes.
Like a pattern on a basketball or a volleyball. All those are different ways to put a sphere together.
So your very basic helmet, like Neil's talking about, just these two pieces here. You make two of each, and this is the bottom edge of the bowl. You put this one here, and you can see it's got another line. So you make another one of these, and it goes on the opposite side of this one, and then the one on the other side, and you'll get the four-piece bowl.
Also, sorry, to expand on that a little bit, if you just do that, you might get sort of angular sides at some point. The next step up from that is getting a heat gun from the hardware store, which is going to be a little bit hotter than a hairdryer, but it's essentially the same thing. And you heat up your foam, and as you heat it up, you'll see it change texture. It'll get more shiny, and that's sealing the surface, but it's also making it more pliable and ready to take shape. My main tool for forming curves in foam is my knee. Just get it and pull it over, because the more you stress the foam into the shape you want, the better it's going to stay that way. If you just curve it and kind of set it there and let it, it's going to go back. Another tool that I use is a finial from a curtain rod, just a metal ball that I bought from Home Depot. And you mount it on a stick or clamp it in your vise and smooth the foam over that if you want to get tighter curves than your knee can do. And that way, you know, so like this guy, all these surfaces, you don't see any facets on this, but this is all foam pieces glued together because they were bent that way first over my knee and then glued together. Yeah, like a duck helmet too.
Yeah, so you can see all the different pieces that went together in that. And then when you put you smooth it out and you paint it,
Kind of
Don't put that down yet. I want you to talk on this a second. Now, I showed you the basic bowl pattern. And it shows that. Tell them how you arrived at your curve, because this is done differently.
this is a Captain America pattern. I just picked it up. It's a basic Captain America pattern. So what you do is you have a flat piece. So if you cut little...
If you're familiar with sewing, it's darts or gussets.
So you can see he's got fill in there, which is a little wider, so you can see where he's cut the triangles out. And it's another form to get a circle. But for me, first try, the very first helmet I ever built was the bowl helmet. And with the basic bowl helmet, covers your head, you can add on to it and make anything out of it. But yeah, this is a little more advanced, and you can see the shape's a little different, and it's wonderful as well.
This one right here is that bowl.
Yeah, this one here, the Loki Helmet, is the bolt pattern turned sideways. So you normally, like, you know, you can see the football shapes and that go this way. This one I turned it sideways, because I wanted it to fit snugger and I wanted the lines and it to run differently. And you can see I got a bald head, and the happy accident, you can see the slight ridge here. When I put it on my head, it's fitted to my head. Once I push it down, it creates a suction. And I can pick things up off the floor, this does not fall off my head.
Yeah, see, now if you wanted to get rid of that, all you'd have to do is heat this up,
Yeah.
get a round shape. I use a little miniature basketball that works really good, kids basketball. And you stick it in it, and don't be afraid to really push on that foam and really get that, to really just pull on that, because that foam will just, you know, it'll form to that shape.
Do you want to talk about adhesives?
Yes.
Why don't we? Go ahead.
So the main one I use to glue the foam together once you've got your pattern, you got it in shape. I use contact cement. So that's either barge adhesive or weldwood, I think it's called, from the hardware store. That both work perfectly fine for me for this sort of these purposes, and it's a brushable, kind of like rubber cement, but much stronger and toxic. So if you're going to use it, always wear a respirator,
Or at least.
Yeah.
This one's like 3 layers. So it's a little higher scale than a dust mask, but yes, because of fumes, this is great for dust. If you're gonna work with toxic fumes, you want a respirator.
And yeah, so it's brushable, and so you just brush it on both surfaces that you're going to attach together. Wait 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. Usually 5 is good for me. Sometimes I'll do 2 coats 5 minutes apart. Wait for them to get pretty much dry to the touch. And then as soon as you touch them together, it's permanent. It's the bond with a contact cement is going to be stronger than the foam itself. So put them together very carefully. Make sure you're lining up your surfaces that you want to line up. So that's one way to do it. I know with Laird.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What brand again?
Barge is one brand, and I think Weldwood is the name of
Yeah,
it.
well,
Barge glue is gonna be really expensive.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like $30 a can. The basic difference between barge glue and regular contact cement is if you wanna, barge glue is made for ships and boats to repair on there. So if you wanna go out and stand in your costume in the pouring rain for 3 days, then barge glue is where you wanna go. But how many of us do that? So contact cement, really, I think you get the same amount of contact as you do with the barge, and it's 1/3 the price.
I
You
don't
can buy a
want-
can for around $10.
a lot of professionals use weldwood. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it's affected the crafting community and the people in various areas stating that they're having trouble finding the weldwood contact cement. Now, I work in my basement. I don't want the toxic fumes, so I do not use contact cement. I also work from here to where that exit sign is my furnace. So it's like, I don't want that in the house. So I do a lot of hot glue. And if you're gonna do hot glue, I recommend the Gorilla Glue. I used to use the cheaper glue, and the Gorilla Glue is so much stronger. Almost all my helmets here are all put together with Gorilla hot glue. Now, I started experimenting a little more recently. Super glue. Super glue will work on foam. I have found on some of the more porous foams, some of the cheaper foams like this, you have to put 2 applications on it because it will harden on the surface and not stick. This one is by a company called Wolfgar Weapons. It's a little thicker, it sets up a little faster, and the nice thing, they also sell something called an Uncure. So if you're like, oh, I didn't glue that right, but I don't like the way it looks, put a little bit of the Uncure on it, and it separates without hurting the foam.
Be careful though with that white foam that you get from craft stores, using super glue on it, it will actually start to smoke. The foam will
Whoa.
actually start heating up and smoke, so just be careful.
Yeah, I haven't done that. I've done it on the gray foam like I showed you, and I've done it on the HD foam. I just recently finished an entire sword, and as an experiment, used nothing but super glue.
The thing
and it
about
didn't
super
work.
glue is it gets a little brittle,
Yeah.
so you gotta watch for that. That's the nice thing about the contact cement, it doesn't get brittle, it'll bend with you.
And before I get to your question, one of the drawbacks that I have found, I guess I like using hot glue because I'm also impatient because I can just hold it for 40 seconds and done, I can move on. If you need to reheat a piece that's been hot glued, now you have issues because that heat gun on the low setting is over 800 degrees, on the high setting it's over 1100. So guess what happens to your hot glue? Yeah, because the hot glue melts at a much lower temperature.
Or standing in the sun too long.
Oh, yeah, I painted a piece, left it in my backyard to dry in the bright sunlight, forgot about it for hours, in intense sunlight. Yes. The Gorilla Glue holds up much longer, much better. I have had some weaken but not separate, but the cheap, like, Walmart brand, oh yeah, especially if it's a piece under stress. So I go back in and put it together, oh yeah. Yes, your question.
My question was just, sometimes I don't go through the tin of contact cement quite as quickly as I think I will, and it'll kind of start to get more gloppy. Is there any way to like thin that out without destroying everything, or is it just a lost cause at that point?
I know Barge does sell a thinner. I don't know if the other ones sell a specific thinner. It might work with mineral spirits or something like that. I don't have experience with that, but I know I've worked with the Barge thinner before, and that does remedy that.
I wanted to wonder if the mineral spirits would actually damage the foam.
Yeah, so I would definitely experiment if you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Try it on a piece of scrap and find out. That's the best way. If you're not sure, get yourself some scrap and go. I'm gonna experiment on this because it just goes to the trash.
I would also say, with your super glue thing, they sell a super glue accelerator, which is a spray that you can either, once you've got your bond, spray it around the bond and it'll set a lot faster, or put the glue on one surface and spray the other surface and bam, it's set.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the super glue and the contact cement, if you need to reheat, it's cool, it's fine. The super glue will give you, like, when you're making swords, you put it on the tip, keep the tip from bumping things and bending. You just like split some on there. Yes?
If you have to reheat something with contact cement, does that release more fumes?
I can't speak on it.
I don't really smell it when I do
Yeah, I
it.
don't think so. 'Cause I think the fuse is the thinner kind of going away, so
Oh,
once
the stuff
once
makes
it's
it set
set,
up, yeah.
once it's set, it's probably good.
Okay.
When you heat it, though, it will release a little bit, so you may have to reclose but it will stick right back together. What I usually do, I'll heat the pieces up before I contact some. And then that way you can get a bend on them, like if you're doing a helmet, or you're doing a shoulder pad, or a knee pad, or whatever, you can get a bend on them before you put them together. And make sure that they line up. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can kind of angle it like this, and you can stick the edge, make sure the edges line up, and then bring it together. Or you can stick it on a flat piece, and stick it down and really push it down hard and come together, and then it'll line up pretty good. Because if you get it off, then you've got an edge that you have to fill.
Right, and the other thing with that is that foam is great because it can mold and squish and shape to whatever you need, but it can be bad with that too when you're doing a seam, and all of a sudden you get to the end of your seam, one's like this and one's like this, and that doesn't squish. So a lot of the patterns, and even when you make your own patterns, you make registration lines that go along it, so it's like a sewing pattern where you have your arrows that need to match up.
And you don't need to do like, well, these have notches out because it's the way the sewing pattern is, and like the first time I used this, I thought I had to cut notches in the foam.
Then you line up, you just draw the line.
Yeah.
As you go,
Yeah.
As you go, you make sure the lines line up, and then your edges will.
Yeah, because it's amazing how much stretch you'll get out of that foam. You'll put two that fit together, that were the same exact length, and yeah, like you say, you've got this much more on one side all of a sudden. It's like,
And then
how did that happen?
That ends up making your piece twist, even if you end up correcting it, so, yeah.
Well, one of the things I've also done before, because like you say, the foam stretches, is I cut a piece just like an millimeter or two too short, like a piece of trim or something, take the heat gun, heat glue it, and just pull it.
Yeah, just pull it.
And glue it down, like, yes, it fits now.
Yeah.
But you don't want to stretch it too much because it's a little thin, and in all directions, and you'll see the unevenness. If it's just a tiny bit, yeah, you can fudge it a little.
So you've decided on a project. You've got a basic pattern, okay? You've got your pattern. You've cut it out. You traced it on your phone, okay? And you've glued it together. So now, what next? What do you do next? So, then you've got it. You can add on the decorative pieces. You can see that's the fun part is all the decorative pieces. You can see all the. I mean, this was a basic rhino head, but then now all of a sudden you add all this this decorative work on there, and now it becomes rhino skin, and you can get your tools, and you can cut in there and make the different things, and so, you know, and you can use the different, the thinner pieces of foam for decorative work, or if you need a thicker thing. I can even, like up here, I took a piece of foam and I put a piece behind there to give it kind of a real angled look. So there's a piece behind here, and then it's glued down on each of these sides to give it a even more rounded part.
And what he's talking about, this piece here not being finished yet, really gives you a good look at that. And if you come up and look at it, again, there's many different sorts of textures on this. It's just wonderful, the variety on it and the techniques. Now, Matt's is all finished, and Matt's pieces look like they belong in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But, you know, again, many textures, many different techniques for doing it.
So this is foam. This is a Padme Amidala headpiece that I made for my wife. It's just a regular craft foam, 5 millimeters, and it's covered in a inexpensive copper foil from Michael's, I believe, that I embossed with this pattern and then glued to the foam.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So it looks like metal, but it's super light, easy to wear, and it was cheap.
That's the thing about foam, you can, depending on the paint job, which we'll get here in a little while, you can make it look like metal, you can make it look like wood, you can make it look like anything you want, you know.
It's all the detail work and the paint and the treatment the paint gets afterwards.
Dremel is your friend. In a Dremel, you can pick one up at Harbor Freight, where you can pick up the floor mats for like $9, something like that. It's a nice little Dremel. If you want to, when you get going and get really into it, and you say, this is what I really want to do, you might want to upgrade to a little better Dremel. But that little $9 job will work great for you at the beginning.
I don't have it with me, I packed it, forgot my other case, but yeah, I had one of those all ready to show them. And it's a whole little kit for like $9. It's a single speed, it has like all these different bits and pieces and stuff you can use. This too, this is a Harbor Freight piece. Harbor Freight's your friend for cheap tools as long as you're not gonna be a professional mechanic or something. I think this is like about $10 also. So if you're a beginner, Harbor Freight is your friend.
Yeah,
Just
so
don't expect the stuff to last like more than a couple of years.
you can use the sanding drums on a Dremel to smooth your corners, round them over to add detail like in the Rhino. Are all those scales carved with the Dremel?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, they sell different sizes of the sanding drums. And if you just poke that straight into your foam while it's running, you get a nice little rivet mark that is repeatable and the same size every time.
I've actually used that technique.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, when you're making your cuts on here, on your edges, make sure that those cuts are like perfectly straight. It's the biggest problem with people that are just starting out, they'll cut and it'll be jagged, and then they try to put it together, and then they've got big holes they have to patch. So make sure, I mean, if you're using scissors, cut down, take a Dremel and just Dremel the edge, get it nice.
Okay.
Okay? Or a lot of people use knives.
Yeah.
Knives, you've got to make sure that they're sharp, really sharp. So every, 2 or 3 or 4 cuts, you're going to have to sharpen it.
Yeah, actually,
Break it off.
I was gonna get to that. He brought it up, I'm glad he did. Yeah, I like using scissors. These are kind of expensive, but they go through this floor mats, like it's tissue paper. I did buy these at Walmart. They're designed for cutting through refrigerator boxes. So you don't buy these in the crafting area, you buy more like, they have the shipping stuff and that kind of thing. And I've had this pair of scissors for 6 years now. I can't find another pair with these nice bird beak blades with a curve. These are good because they're short, and if you gotta cut curves, it goes around them. I have another pair that has straight blades, a little longer. Again, they cut the foam nice, but they're not as good for curves. Blades, as Neil said, they need to be sharp. I love these guys. This is again Harbor Freight, and you can break pieces off as it gets dull. It's like 50 cents. So I buy them by the handful, and just in the garbage, get a fresh one. I actually have one I keep just for small, have to be clean edge cuts.
And then curves especially.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then rougher cuts where you're not gonna see it, bigger knives. And the difference is, if your knife gets dull, you will see it on the edge of the foam. Instead of having that nice clean, you will actually gouge the foam, you'll have tears you'll need to sand, And you'll have to sand them so deep, now your piece is too small.
And you'll see on the rhino head here, it's used, is that the silicone filler?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
So there are products that like you can get at the hardware store to help smooth your seams. Foam clay also works to smooth your seams, that's what I use on this guy. So with these, you're probably using a wet finger too, right?
Yep.
To smooth them out as much as you can so you don't have to sand it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, this isn't this isn't the caulk stuff they're talking about. I do use that as well, and you can wet it. This is something I use on pieces that aren't gonna be flexible, because this will crack if it's not a flexible piece. And I like it because it dries faster than the caulk does. So as long as it's, you know, like something that's gonna be rigid.
What is that? Tell what it is.
This is plastic wood, so it's a plastic-based wood filler. Again, I got this at Walmart, it's pretty cheap. And again, you put a little bit on, squeeze out the tube, wet your finger, smooth it out, scrape off the excess. And this, ready to sand in a couple hours. I've done it, and if you spread it thinner, you can even sand it sooner. Like on the Loki horns here, I filled the seams with it, because the horns aren't gonna flex at all. I wouldn't do it on the bowl, because if I did it on the bowl, it would crack. So, yeah, it's a nice quick seam sealer for something that you're not gonna bend.
Yeah, you don't always need to seal your seams. Sometimes you kind of want to see them in the finished product, or they're going to be hidden, or you don't care. But if you really want that glossy look, probably have to fill the seams a little bit. Did you want to talk about the horns? 'Cause-
Yeah, I was getting to that. I was gonna get to the horns then to the knives, but you brought the knives up, so that's great. And I love that because everybody has their own style. And you and I were actually having a discussion at the table, like just yesterday. And I use both knives and scissors, depends on the application, and something, you're always evolving and learning doing this, and something I didn't realize until just recently, and I'm trying to do something that's more precision. When you use the scissors, especially on the thicker foam, which you don't think about, so that foam being like this after it's cut, the edges are bowed in a little bit, so the scissors squeeze as they cut. So if you put two pieces together and cut by scissors, you can have a very slight valley right at the seam. If you cut it with a sharp blade, they meet buttoned straight together. So if it's a piece that doesn't matter, you know, that much, you know, about the seam, or you're gonna cover the seam up, scissors are wonderful. As the foam gets thinner, that's less important. Like if you're cutting like 2 millimeter, even the 6 you start to see it. But the heavy floor mats, and you want a nice even button, it's not gonna happen unless you fill that seam. So yes, very sharp blades, no tears. But getting to the horns. These horns and these horns were actually done in the exact same way, and now you've got horns over there as well, and Neil does, so I'm gonna let all three of us will talk on how we approached what we have.
A horn is not just a horn, there are different kinds of things, way to do them, so.
Okay, so you can see there's a variety of types of horns on the Viking helmet. This is actually a copy of the helmet from How to Train Your Dragon, one of the crazy twins. It's his helmet. Looked at the picture and drew it out, and this is all his horns were. So I took a pair of heavy gauge paper, I measured out what I wanted, I drew it, and like the Loki horns, done the same way. There's just 2 pieces of the floor mat foam. You make them together, and then I would take a pair of scissors and do what I call basically mitering. Take the scissors on an angle along the edges and cut it off, so that way I have less to sand, so it's kind of roughly geometrically shaped. And I've got a disc sander and a belt sander, and I'll rough sand it on that, and then go over to the Dremel and finish it out until you get to the shape. And I recommend scissoring off the bulk of the excess, because otherwise you're just making more dust and more work for yourself. You can get to the final product. Some of the pieces on this are actually 3 to 4 layers thick, depending on how big the horn is. But all of them are done the same way. They're done 2D, then you turn them into the 3D rounds.
You just stack.
Yeah.
Stack piece after piece until you get the width that you want, and then just
Yeah.
sand it off.
Now, I've seen people do the same thing, but they're going rounds, and they're stacking rounds. The only trouble is that means more seams going all the way down the length of it. So this way, I've only got 1 or 2 seams running the length, and I use it, in this, I encompass those lines into the texture of the horn to make it look more realistic, because they all, if you look at it, they all have various lines in it. There's some paint techniques, but I won't hit that now. But yeah, just simple as this. And I actually, if anyone wants a pattern for these, I actually made copies of my pattern. It's so simple. I'll give them to you guys. Yeah.
I approach horns a little differently than Laird does. I don't stack. I So if I did a Loki helmet too, but it was in storage and I didn't get to the storage, so. But my horns, so basically what you do is you look at the profile of the horn that you want. And then you can cut out two pieces like that and glue them together like this. And then you have a piece underneath that's just like straight. And then you have basically a tube that goes up to the point. And it's much lighter than stacking. If you want some rigidity in there, you could put a wire through there, and then you can bend it however you want. And so that's kind of how I approach horns. It's kind of like this guy right here, where you can see his horns are just, and it's just, basically that's like a kind of a big circle with a pipe piece out. And then when you close it, it kind of goes together like this.
And I would definitely recommend it for the larger horns like that.
But that's how, I like doing that because it's lighter,
You can achieve more complex curves that way, like a ram's horn. You're not going to want to carve out of pieces of stacked foam. So there are available templates online from like Kamui Cosplay, or Evil Ted probably has horns. Or you can take something like tinfoil or like modeling wire and make your form yourself. Cover that with a layer of cellophane or tinfoil and masking tape. Draw seams on your masking tape, cut that apart, and use that as your templates for your phone.
The tinfoil form, like he says, is great. And now that you mentioned it, like I have done that. I didn't make horns. I did a dragon, a baby dragon. I did how to train your dragon. Dragon's going on with fish legs. Got a little pouch in the front, the baby dragon hanging out. I'm like, how am I going to do the arms? So that's what I did, is I took tinfoil, wrapped them in foam, and then drummed them out, and then the hands, basically I made wire and foam plate to make the little hands and just start them. So yeah, like you say, you can use the techniques for other things, just use your imagination and apply.
And you don't have to use
your
foam.
to something else.
These are 3D printed.
Okay.
Because I wanted some translucency there, which you're not going to get with foam.
Yeah.
Those look great, but they weren't what I was after, so different solutions.
So any questions on the horns at all? Wow, okay, cool.
I do have a question about the, you talking about Evil Ted's on a website?
Yes.
Yes, oh yes, he's one of the bigger ones out there. You just type in Evil Ted's foam patterns or whatever, it'll pop up.
And he's got tutorials on there how to do it, so you can watch videos on how to put the stuff together. They're really easy. I mean, they're so easy. You get those things, you cut them out. He's got registration marks, everything for you.
The big names I would say in foam cosplay building are Evil Ted, Punished Props, and Kamui Cosplay,
Yes.
probably.
Yeah.
Kimui's been really popping up on my feeds lately.
Yeah.
If you see her builds, they're amazing.
Yes.
She does a lot of like the video game armor and stuff, very elaborate, lots of LEDs and stuff, which is not something I've gotten into with armor before, but
And I think she sells pattern books too.
Yeah.
You can
She
buy
does.
pattern books for
They're
every
really
one of
good.
her armor builds. And then she's got videos on how she went about doing it, so you can kind of use the pattern and just kind of, she'll walk you through it in a way, so she speeds it up.
and SKS, like you mentioned before, he has some good tutorials, especially with using the foam play, because it's something he researched and came up with in market. So if you're interested in foam play, SKS, Stephen K. Smith on YouTube.
And he gives you, he has a lot of free foam patterns out
Yes, oh yeah,
there. Just stuff that'll get you started. I know he just did a Krampus mask just recently that was like really cool. And he does lots of things and stuff. And he's got Twitter that he does a lot of stuff on there where he'll talk you through things like how he went about his builds.
Evil Ted has a Facebook page also, and if you friend on the Facebook page, Steve K. Smith puts a lot of stuff up there. And he'll give you the link to his YouTube channel, and yeah, he's constantly, anything he shows on there, here's the template for free, here's the video on how to do it for free. There's a lot of free templates out there. Kamui though, like I say, Kamui's work has been blowing me away. I've only discovered her in like the last 6 months, and like, I think every other day on my feed, it's like, oh, there's a new thing by Kamui. But the other thing you can buy too, if you want to be lazy like I was with this was a really quick build. It's not one of my best, but I did this like in, maybe 4 hours. these pieces. I didn't go to any of the techniques we told you about. I totally cheated. And what this is SKS not only sells regular foam, they sell dowel rods and half rods and triangulars and squares to save you time for trim and stuff. So these were two of the larger half rounds, and I just glued it together, heated and bent it and glued it on. So I'm like, all the sanding work's pretty much done. A little light sanding on that texture on it before I painted it. That was it.
Yeah, so those dowel rods, if you want something like this profile on there, you can just buy those dowel rods and put them on there. I didn't, I went old school, like back cut, which is, when you get really good, it's back cutting. And it's just taking a flat piece of foam and you make cuts in it, in the back, and you pie out some of the cuts. If you want it to go in like this, you pie it out. If you want it to go out like that, you just make a cut and you just put it. And then I just took, that's the one time that I use hot glue. And hot glue in there, and hot glue works really good.
Because hot glue fills space as opposed to CA glue or contact cement. You can use hot glue to fill those voids that you have left, so you don't have.
Oh, many times I go, oh, look at this little hole here where this stuff meets. I'm like, fill the hot glue, like cool, because it shrinks a little bit more. And I'm taking the edge of the nozzle and smooth it off. And hot glue, once it's set, you can actually sand it a bit. So yeah, it does work out.
That's the bad thing about using this stuff, because you can't really sand this. So you've got to get it smooth when you get it on. I wasn't too concerned with getting it smooth. I knew I was going to cover it up, but I just wanted to kind of give a flat enough surface.
Well, this is going to be like more of a natural looking texture, and very little, living things in nature are like shiny smooth. That's what great thing if you're doing like a wood grain. I did like 6 different group costumes. It's like, oh, I don't have this uniform. Trees aren't uniform. You just go crazy. It's like,
This too, you can cover your foam with vinyl or fabric or things like that. Part of my costume last night, the hip plates were covered in just faux leather vinyl, and that way you don't have to worry about seams at all, because you're just covering.
well, you kind of do. You can see, because that was my first ever attempt at covering something in fabric, and I didn't plan it well enough, and you can see it's got like a scar on each temple. It's because I'm like, and actually, I just cut a basic piece, and I'm stretching it and gluing it. Ooh, what do I do now? So when you cover it in fabric, you got to think a little bit like you're going to sew it, so you can plan where your seams are going to be.
In addition to that, you can also take that thin foam. What you want to do when you're thinking about doing helmets, like for instance,
This is beautiful.
This one had pieces, it had pieces coming here, around here, and it didn't look that great. But you take a thin piece of foam and you can skin it. You could skin like half this helmet if you wanted to. And you have a piece going down the middle. And try to look for, when you're doing things, how you can put a piece over it to cover up those seams, and plan that out as you're doing your helmets and stuff.
See, he just hit upon one of my favorite sayings: the best way to hide a seam is to not have a seam. The best way to so if you can put something over it, like this was not done as a bowl helmet. I love this helmet. This kind of built itself. I actually took a mannequin head and looking at the comic book. This is the original Night Owl. Most people are familiar with the one from the movie. This is the guy, the retired guy from the Watchmen. And the stripe right down the top covers the seam where these two pieces meet. And then, and some of the other seams on here were left showing because when you look at the original Hardwick, he had seams, and you can see I even faked a stitch down the middle, because this seam down here was actually put in as I grooved it in. Took actually just a sharp pencil. Just put down the foam again like 3 times. I don't want to tear the foam. I just kind of want to stretch the surface. Did the same thing for the stitches. And then it's actually just got semi-metallic Flexi-Seal on it, which is Plastidip, but it's Rust-Oleum's brand. And then it's hot glue fabric to it because he's got a top.
Yeah, so a lot of times before you paint, you're going to want to seal the foam first with heat, and then maybe with some kind of primer. So you can use Mod Podge, wood glue, probably watered down a little bit so it's not gloopy, or Plastidip, which is very popular because you can get it at the hardware store in a spray can, and it essentially gives you a flexible sealed surface. That's what I just for this guy. Really, I think most people just use black because it's somehow has better chemical properties than the other ones, I think. Some people have complained about the white and the gray. So black plastic dip is a good sealer and primer.
I know some people have had good luck with that auto primer too.
Yes.
That on there, that's sandable auto primer, and you can put a coat on, sand it, put another coat, keep sanding it until you get this smooth, with the small grit sandpaper, and you get a real smooth look too.
Yeah, it's called 2-in-1. It is auto primer, but nice about it is it fills small imperfections. You got gouges where you slipped, or you got seams that are still showing a little bit. It's designed to fill this stuff. Now, I know he spoke about plastic dip. I hate plastic dip, and I'll tell you why. Plastic dip is very finicky about the temperature you spray it in, the temperature of the can, the temperature of the surface, and I hate the spray nozzle. It always starts out, oh, spray nice, and you got all these little, now you got a textured surface of all this rubber that you can't sand off. So I always go the Rust-Oleum version, which has a fan type spray, and you can turn it this way, turn it that way. It sprays down smoother, it's a little less worrisome about your temperatures, but it does need to be warm, as a friend told me who uses it a lot. Shake the can, if the can still feels cold, let it warm up. You want to get the can to a minimum of 70 degrees. So I usually I work in my basement a lot, I always spray paint it outside. Take it, set it in a sunny spot in the house, and I'll leave it there for a couple hours. Shake it, still feels cool, let it sit for a while. And then you'll get a smoother finish. Because believe me, I have 2 different projects I messed up on. Spraying it on cold, and and then you're like, what do I do now? Once it's on, it really can't take it off.
It's like a rubbery, it's almost like a
Yeah, like a rubber membrane.
So, what types of paint do you use?
Me?
That's our next step.
I was gonna say, that's them if you guys are
Lots
ready.
of different things.
Go ahead, you start.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you want to cover a base coat, spray paint, you get, you cover the whole, if you want, just one thing, you can get spray paint. And spray paint comes in lots of different things, different kinds. This is a metallic spray paint. And you can get the base coat, you just spray it. But then you've got just this gray blob. So what do you do next? So there's a paint out there, it's called FX, and you can get it at, I think Hobby Lobby is where you can get it at. And it's just, it's a water-based paint, and you can just paint it on. If you take the black and you put it in there, and then you can kind of wipe it off, or get a little water, and you can water it down. Get it in the cracks, you get some shadow look. So you get something that looks like a gray blob, and now all of a sudden it looks kind of cool, and you can add rust on there with different colors and things, and so you've got that. This is the secret, is the shadowing. That's the difference between something that looks okay and something that's like, oh my gosh,
Weathering.
It's the shadowing and weathering, and you take a look. If I'd have just painted this helmet, yeah, it's okay, but then, I added shadowing in there, and you can see it really pops that out. I added some battle damage on the front, and it just makes it that much more, and it shows up in photographs more. So I don't use an airbrush, I just use brushes, but a lot of people use airbrush, so I don't think you use
so I definitely, all those techniques I use, you can see this one is really weathered in the seams. It's almost like a rusty, oily surface. That is brown and black water-based oil paint. For some reason, it just looks more like metal once it's weathered with that. These two are 100% airbrushed. That is just what I found worked for the finish I was looking for. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm fairly new to airbrushing, and the kit I have is like entry-level, basic, garbage airbrush. But it works for cosplay, no problem. Again, the weathering on this one is just a aquamarine acrylic paint that is dabbed into the edges and seams and corners and brushed off.
dry brushing is really good. You put your brush in the paint, you take a little cloth and you kind of wipe some of it off, and then you scrub it in there. Really scrub it in there. I mean, really get it in there. Get it in those cracks.
So you stuck in dry brushing, you can see that this looks weathered. I painted the whole thing black, and it needed to look like really dirty silver to match the movie. And that's all it was a gloss black. And I took silver on the brush, and I wiped most of it off on a rag. And then the brush is mostly dry, and just kept going over it until it filled in. This is all done with the dry brushing.
And what that does is it hits the points that stick up, which are the points that naturally would get weathered more and shiny, and so it really sells that without a lot of effort.
I made sure I talked last on this because I kind of have my own ideas about painting, and my wife probably wants to shoot me because she bought me a really nice airbrush set for an anniversary, and then I spent like another $100 adding more stuff to it, and I haven't used an airbrush since high school. And you can see I've been out of high school a long time. So I probably got about $300 of that airbrushing equipment in my basement collecting dust I haven't touched ever. It's been down there for 3 years now. Because I'm impatient, I want it done now. And especially if it's going together nicely, I want to see that finished product, so I paint everything with brushes. And Neil had mentioned FX paint. I paint almost everything with acrylics by hand with a brush. And the funny thing is, the more I buy acrylic paints, I try different kinds of stuff. Look at the label, it's always Plaid brand. And they have different levels. FX is one of the best, highest levels. The FX paint is made for foam. It has a slightly stretchy surface when it's dry. But when it comes to metallics, I stumbled upon Martha Stewart. I hate to say it's Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart paint. And I'm looking at the label like, oh, look who makes it. Plaid. They make FX. They make the cheap stuff, Walmart sells. And so Plaid is like one of the biggest manufacturers of acrylic paint out there. But what I like this Loki Helmet, this is just 2 coats of gold. And I'm like, it covers, the metallics cover so nicely. Silvers, golds, yellows, they suck covering over anything dark or any repair you made or whatever, because they're so translucent. Like this was not Martha Stewart before I discovered the yellow. I had to paint that 6 times to get that yellow dark enough where you didn't see the gray through it.
So like, what you'll find with acrylic paint is you spend a little bit more money, you get a lot more pigment. The cheap 99-cent Hobby Lobby acrylics, you're gonna have to brush them on 10 times to get a nice covering or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But like the Martha Stewart is a little bit high end, the Plaid Effects are a little bit more high end. They have more pigment in them, so you only have to do it once or twice. A lot of these, like when I tried to do this with the cheap 99-cent little craft store acrylics, you couldn't even see it. I would brush it in and it would just disappear. And so I went back and I bought like the $5 bottle of it, and all of a sudden, there's my finish.
Especially with metallics. And you want that metal-looking finish, spend the extra money on the metallics. If it's going to be a matte surface, then it doesn't matter as much. You can buy the lower end. And it also depends on, is this going to be one off and use it once and never see it again?
Now the basic rule, if you're laying in shadows, if you want to do silvers or like other colors, black is your shadow. If you're doing gold, brown is your shadow.
Yes, very good. I've even used like a dark copper on a metallic, some of the shadow, but I still want that kind of metal-looking shadow.
And don't ignore rust too on your pieces. I mean, rust comes in lots of different colors. I mean, there's oranges and there's greens. Sometimes, depending on what kind of metal you want it to look like, you can add those pieces in. When you lay on battle damage, you put whatever metal is, or you put kind of a black. If you lay a black down first and then you put a silver through there, it looks battle damage. It looks like it's come through.
Makes it look like it's sourced out. Like this one's got a lot of battle damage on it, like the scars and stuff. It's supposed to look like cracks or whatever. I try to match the cartoon version as much as possible. Unfortunately, it's a little slightly short of reality, but trying to match a cartoon. So you can see I actually cut into the foam in various places, and I watered down some black and let it in there, and then dabbed it off with a cloth and let it just dry in there. But like the horns, to make them look more realistic, if you come up here and look towards the end, it's not just white. I brushed in yellow, I brushed a little bit of orange. I actually, on the tips, sanded some of the paint off to get that gray from the phone to show through, because if you look at like bull's horns and stuff, there's modeling and colors in there. And I tried to simulate that, like, you know, Matt and Neil are saying, with other colors.
Did a beautiful job on those horns.
Oh, thank you, yeah. I'm actually pretty proud of this song. It turned out nice. I've had someone say, a lot of the phone pieces look good from like 5 steps away. It's like, this looks good for something. But yeah, it's, you know, take your time, think about it, look at something like, as a perspective or as a model, and you'll see that it's more than just white. There's other shades in there. Put them in.
I think we're at time.
Are we?
Is there any quick questions that anybody has? And we can talk outside there as well, so.
Oh, yeah, we had like 4 minutes. So, yeah, as Neil said, you can ask us questions outside, because I think we gotta give the room for the next group.
Do you want to give your social media in case anybody wants to jump on and
Sure, I'm on Instagram mainly, and TikTok a little bit as mgcostumer.
I'm on Instagram and I'm Denver Haze, 2018, Denver Haze 2018.
Mine's really easy, I'm Laird of Cosplay, on Instagram and on Facebook.
Okay.
And I do have an Etsy site, which is just Laird of Cosplay Props. Any other questions real quick before we wrap this up?
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I gotta pack all my stuff out.